It was a day Ethan Walker would never forget. The storm had rolled in suddenly, blanking the sky in a swirling mix of dark gray clouds. Thunder rumbled ominously in the distance, and the wind howled through the tall pines surrounding his small cabin near the edge of the woods. Rain lashed against the windows as Ethan drove down the empty country road, his truck's headlights barely piercing through the torrential downpour. He had been on his way back from town, having stocked up on supplies to weather the storm. As he navigated the treacherous bends of the road, something caught his eye. A small, shivering figure huddled on the shoulder, illuminated briefly by his headlights. At first, Ethan thought it was just a pile of debris blown onto the road by the storm. But as he drew closer, he realized it was an animal, a dog, soaked to the bone and trembling in the cold rain. Ethan pulled over immediately, his tires skidding slightly on the slick asphalt. He grabbed his jacket and stepped out into the storm. The rain was icy, soaking him to the skin within seconds, but he didn't care. His eyes were fixed on the small creature ahead. As he approached, the dog's ears perked up slightly, but it didn't move. It looked exhausted, its fur matted with mud and water, its eyes wide with fear. "Hey there, buddy," Ethan called out gently, crouching down a few feet away. He could see now that the dog was no more than a pup, maybe a few months old. Its thick fur and striking markings made it look like a husky, though it was hard to tell in the dim light. "I'm not gonna hurt you," the pup whimpered softly, its body quivering as it tried to retreat further into itself. Ethan took off his jacket and slowly edged closer, careful not to startle it. He draped the jacket over the pup, wrapping it up as gently as he could. It didn't resist, too weak and frightened to fight back. "There we go. Let's get you out of this rain," Ethan murmured. He lifted the pup into his arms, surprised by how light it was. The poor thing couldn't weigh more than 10 pounds. He could feel its ribs beneath its wet fur, a sign that it had been struggling to survive for some time. Ethan carried the pup back to his truck, shielding it from the rain as best as he could. Once inside, he placed it carefully on the passenger seat, wrapping it tighter in the jacket. The pup let out a soft whine, its eyes flickering shut as it finally began to relax. "You're safe now," Ethan said, turning the heater on full blast. He glanced at the pup as he drove the last few miles to his cabin, his mind racing with questions. Where had it come from? Was it someone's lost pet? Or had it been abandoned? And most importantly, would it survive? By the time Ethan pulled into his driveway, the storm was in full fury. The wind screamed through the trees, and lightning illuminated the sky in jagged flashes. He parked as close to the cabin as he could, then hurried inside with the pup cradled in his arms. The warmth of the cabin was a stark contrast to the icy rain outside. Ethan set the pup down on a blanket near the fireplace, which he quickly stoked to life. The flames crackled and danced, casting a comforting glow across the room. The pup stirred slightly, its eyes fluttering open as it took in its new surroundings. "Let's get you cleaned up," Ethan said, fetching a towel and a bowl of warm water. He worked carefully, wiping away the mud and drying the pup's thick fur. As he did, he noticed how striking it was, a mix of black, gray and white, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to hold a depth of intelligence and wildness. It was a beautiful creature, even its weakened state. When he was done, Ethan sat back on his heels and studied the pup. "You need a name," he said thoughtfully. His gaze drifted to the window, where the storm raged on. "How about Storm? Seems fitting." The pup didn't respond. "Of course," but Ethan smiled anyway. He said, giving it a gentle pat on the head. Storm flinched slightly at the touch, but didn't pull away entirely. Ethan took that as a good sign. He spent the rest of the evening caring for Storm, offering it small bits of food and water. The pup ate ravenously, as if it had had a proper meal in days. Ethan made a mental note to take it to the vet as soon as the storm passed, just to make sure it was healthy. As the hours went by, Storm began to relax, its small body stretched out on the blanket near the fire. Ethan sat nearby, sipping a cup of coffee and watching the pup with a mixture of curiosity and concern. He could shake the feeling that there was something different about this dog, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin, there was a sense of calm. Ethan felt a strange connection to Storm, as if fate had brought them together on this tumultuous night. He didn't know what the future held, but he was determined to give Storm a chance at a better life. As midnight approached, the pup finally drifted off into a peaceful sleep, its breathing steady and even. Ethan watched it for a while longer before finally heading to bed himself. He left the fire burning low, casting a soft glow over the room, and made sure Storm was comfortable before turning in. That night, as the storm howled outside, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. He didn't know it yet, but the decision to stop for that tiny, shivering creature on the side of the road would change his life forever. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan Walker found himself adjusting to the unexpected presence of Storm in his life. The small, trembling puppy he had rescued from the raging storm gradually revealed a fierce and wild personality. At first, Ethan thought it was simply the typical energy of a young husky. As Storm grew, it became increasingly clear that there was something unusual about this animal. Ethan's home, a cozy cabin nestled at the edge of a dense forest, was not particularly large, but it was enough for him and his newfound companion. He spent his mornings fixing up small repairs around the house and his evenings reading by the fire. Storm often lay curled up near his feet, a presence that brought unexpected warmth to Ethan's solitary life. Yet there were moments that made Ethan pause and wonder. Storm's eyes were the first thing that Ethan noticed. Unlike the playful and mischievous gaze of most puppies, Storm's eyes held an intense, almost predatory sharpness. They seemed to follow Ethan's every move with an eerie precision, making him feel as though he were being studied rather than merely watched. One evening, as Ethan was chopping vegetables for dinner, he caught Storm's reflection in the window. The way Storm tilted his head, his unblinking eyes fixed on the knife in Ethan's hand, sent a shiver down his spine. But Ethan shook off the feeling, attributing it to his overactive imagination. As Storm grew, his physical strength became apparent. By the time he was a few months old, he was already larger and more muscular than most dogs his age. Ethan began to notice how effortlessly Storm could leap over obstacles or drag heavy objects. Once, while Ethan was unloading a bag of firewood from his truck, he accidentally dropped a log. Before Ethan could bend down to pick it up, Storm had already clamped it between his powerful jaws and carried it to the pile with ease. "Good boy," Ethan muttered, a mix of amazement and unease tinging his voice. Storm's behavior also began to raise questions. Unlike most dogs, he didn't seem to enjoy typical displays of affection. When Ethan reached out to pet him, Storm often flinched or moved away, as if touch was unfamiliar or even unwelcome. Storm rarely wagged his tail or displayed the kind of playful exuberance Ethan expected. Instead, he carried himself with a dignified aloofness that seemed far too mature for his age. Despite these peculiarities, Ethan's bond with Storm deepened. The dog, or what Ethan still believed to be a dog, became his closest companion. They developed a routine: long walks through the forest, evenings spent by the fireplace, and the occasional trip to town for supplies. Storm's presence filled a void in Ethan's life, providing a sense of purpose and connection that he hadn't felt in years. However, Storm's wild side occasionally surfaced, disrupting the fragile harmony of their life together. One afternoon, while hiking through the woods, Ethan decided to let Storm off his leash for the first time. Storm darted ahead, his powerful legs carrying him through the underbrush with astonishing speed. Ethan called out, his voice echoing through the trees, but Storm didn't return. Panic set in as Ethan searched for hours, his calls growing hoarse and his flashlight casting long, eerie shadows in the encroaching darkness. Just as Ethan was about to give up and head home, he heard the sound of rustling leaves. Storm emerged from the shadows, his first streak with mud in his jaws clamped around the lifeless body of a rabbit. Ethan froze, his heart pounding as he took in the scene. Storm's eyes glinted in the dim light, and for a moment, Ethan felt as though he were staring into the eyes of a predator rather than a pet. "Storm, drop it," Ethan commanded, his voice firm but laced with unease. Storm hesitated for a moment before releasing the rabbit and stepping back. Ethan knelt down, examining the animal. The clean, precise bite marks on its neck suggested a level of hunting skill that no ordinary dog should possess. Ethan buried the rabbit and walked home in silence, Storm trailing obediently behind him. From that day on, Ethan became more attuned to Storm's behaviors. He began to notice the way Storm moved through the foresterland, deliberate and with an uncanny sense of awareness. Storm seemed to know when a deer was nearby long before Ethan could hear or see anything. Sometimes Storm would stop abruptly during their walks, his ears perked and his body tense, as if sensing an invisible presence. Ethan often felt a chill during these moments, as though he were intruding on a world he didn't fully understand. Back at the cabin, Storm's strength and wildness continued to manifest in small but significant ways. He chewed through toys that were supposed to be indestructible, shredded furniture with a single swipe of his claws, and once managed to push open a locked door with sheer force. Ethan began to wonder if Storm was simply an unusually strong and spirited dog, or if there was something more to his nature. Despite the challenges, Ethan's patience never wavered. He spent hours researching dog training techniques and experimenting with ways to manage Storm's behavior. He built a sturdy outdoor pen to give Storm more space to roam, but even that proved to be a temporary solution. One morning, Ethan awoke to find the pen empty and the metal gate bent out of shape. Storm was sitting calmly on the porch, his fur ruffled but otherwise unharmed, as if to say, "You can contain me." Ethan couldn't help but laugh, despite the frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "You re something else. You know that," he said, ruffling Storm's fur. For a brief moment, Storm allowed the contact, leaning into Ethan's touch before pulling away and trotting off into the yard. The turning point came one night when Ethan woke to the sound of low growls. He grabbed a flashlight and made his way to the living room, where he found Storm standing by the window, his fur bristling and his body rigid. Ethan peered outside but saw nothing unusual. He tried to reassure Storm, but the dog's intense focus didn't waver. Eventually, Storm relaxed and returned to his spot by the fireplace. But Ethan could shake the feeling that Storm had sensed something he couldn't. As the months passed, Storm grew into a magnificent creature, his coat thick and glossy, his muscles rippling beneath his fur. Ethan often marveled at Storm's beauty and strength, but the nagging questions about his true nature lingered. Was Storm really just an extraordinary dog, or was there something else at play? Ethan couldn't ignore the signs any longer, and he knew that he would soon have to seek answers. For now, though, Ethan chose to focus on the present. He and Storm shared a bond forged through trials and uncertainties, a connection that transcended the ordinary. Whatever Storm's true nature might be, Ethan couldn't imagine his life without him. But deep down, he knew that their journey together was far from over. As Storm grew into a full-fledged adult, his presence became increasingly difficult to manage. Ethan had hoped that maturity would bring some level of calmness to the creature, but instead it only seemed to amplify Storm's intensity. The once endearing quirks of his companion now verged on unsettling. Ethan decided it was time to uncover the truth about the animal he had come to love but barely understood. It was a crisp autumn morning when Ethan made the decision. Storm had just returned from one of his unscorted jaunts through the forest, his coat smeared with mud and traces of blood around his jaws. The sight wasn't uncommon, but this time Ethan felt an urgency he couldn't ignore. He had grown used to Storm's wild nature, but the nagging question of what Storm truly was had taken root in his mind. Ethan loaded Storm into his old truck and began the hour-long drive to the nearest veterinary clinic. As usual, sat silently in the passenger seat, his piercing eyes scanning the horizon. Ethan glanced at him from time to time, trying to reconcile the loyal companion he knew with the feral creature that seemed to live just beneath the surface. The veterinary clinic was a modest building nestled in the outskirts of town. Dr. Marianne Cole, a seasoned veterinarian with over 2 decades of experience, greeted Ethan warmly as he walked through the door. She had met Storm briefly during a routine checkup months ago, but even then she had remarked on his unique characteristics. "He's grown quite a bit since I last saw him," Dr. Cole said, eyeing Storm with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. Storm sat calmly on the examination table, his posture regal and his eyes unblinking. "That's part of why I'm here," Ethan admitted. "There is something different about him. I've never seen a dog like Storm before." Dr. Cole nodded thoughtfully and began her examination. She measured Storm's weight, checked his teeth, and ran her hands along his thick coat. As she worked, her expression shifted from professional detachment to subtle concern. Finally, she turned to Ethan. "Ethan, I am going to run a few tests," she said, her voice carefully measured. "Storm is healthy, but there are certain features, his musculature, his teeth, even his bone structure that aren't typical of domestic dogs." Ethan's heart sank. He had been bracing himself for this moment, but hearing it aloud still hit him hard. "What do you think he is?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Harper." Dr. Cole hesitated before replying. "I can say for sure until we get the test results back, but there's a possibility that Storm isn't fully domesticated. He might have wolf ancestry." The word wolf hung in the air like a storm cloud. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to process the revelation. It made sense of the intense eyes, the powerful build, the wild behavior. It also felt surreal. He had raised Storm from a helpless pup, showering him with love and care. Could his loyal companion truly be a wolf? The days following Storm's visit to the vet were some of the most reflective of Ethan's life. Dr. Marianne Cole's words lingered in his mind. "I'm not sure Storm is entirely a dog at all." The DNA results confirmed it a week later. Storm not a husky, as Ethan had assumed, but a wolf, or more accurately, a high-counted wolf dog. This revelation, while not entirely unexpected, shook Ethan to his core. Sitting by the fire one evening, Ethan watched Storm dozing peacefully on the rug. The animal that had once been a helpless pup was now a majestic and powerful creature, its thick coat shimmering in the firelight and its chest rising and falling with steady breaths. It was hard to reconcile the wild instincts that had surfaced in Storm, the hunting behaviors, the eerie howls, the unease with human affection, with the bond they had built over the months. Ethan had grown to love Storm as more than just a pet. It was his companion, a steady presence in his isolated life. But now, faced with the truth of Storm's nature, Ethan had to make a decision. Could he continue to care for an animal that was never meant to live as a domestic pet? And more importantly, was it fair to Storm to keep it confined to a life it wasn't built for? The answer came him slowly, over long walks through the woods and quiet nights spent reflecting. Ethan began researching sanctuaries and wildlife reserves that specialized in wolf dogs, hoping to find a place where Storm could live freely while still being cared for. It was a painful process, but Ethan knew it was the right thing to do. Storm deserved a chance to thrive in an environment that matched its wild spirit. After weeks of searching, Ethan found a wildlife sanctuary a few hours' drive away. The facility was renowned for its expertise in caring for wolves and wolf dogs, offering large, open spaces where the animals could roam and interact with others of their kind. The sanctuary staff were understanding and compassionate, assuring Ethan that Storm would be in the best possible hands. The day of parting arrived faster than Ethan had anticipated. Loading Storm into the truck for what would be their final journey together was bittersweet. Storm, as always, seemed to sense something was different. It sat calmly in the back seat, its piercing blue eyes meeting Ethan's in the rearview mirror. There was no fear in those eyes. When they arrived at the sanctuary, Ethan was greeted warmly by the staff, who marveled at Storm's beauty and demeanor. They assured Ethan that Storm would have a large enclosure, plenty of care, and even companions to interact with. Still, handing over the leash was one of the hardest things Ethan had ever done. As he stood by the gate, watching Storm walk away with one of the handlers, Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. Storm paused and turned back, their eyes meeting one last time. It was as if the wolf dog understood, offering Ethan a silent farewell. The drive home was quiet. Ethan's cabin felt emptier than it had in years, the absence of Storm a tangible weight. But as he sat by the fire that night, he knew he had done the right thing. Loving something meant giving it what it needed, even if that meant letting it go. Storm would always hold a special place in his heart, a reminder of the wild beauty that had briefly graced his life.